Friends, you're welcome. Ambassador, you're welcome. The Hague Convention defines neutrality, and I trust, Cathaoirleach, you'll forgive me for challenging neutrality at this point in time. Ireland only ever once defined neutrality, and that was in a paper called Challenges and Opportunities Abroad, Ireland's White Paper on Foreign Policy in 1995, International Security, Chapter 4, Paragraph 4.5. In the strict sense of international law and practice, neutrality and its attendant rights and duties do not exist in peacetime. They arise during a state of war. Neutrality represents an attitude of impartiality adopted by a state towards the participants in a conflict and recognises as such by the belligerents. Such an attitude creates certain rights and duties between the neutral state and the belligerents, which commence at the outbreak of war and end with the cessation. Why did I read that into the record? Ireland has never been a neutral state. The only time we've been tested before now was between 1939 and 1945 during the Second World War, where we openly repatriated members of the Allies who landed on our island, in our republic, across the border so as they could get back into the war. We are being tested now. We are now facing autocracy versus democracy in Ukraine. And the question is, where do we stand? We have provided medical aid, we have provided financial support, we have provided helmets and flak jackets. Sitting in a building not so far away from us right now are a substantial number of Javelin rockets that can be used to take out tanks, a substantial number of Gustav 84mm anti-tank weapons that can be used to take out tanks, a substantial number of AT-4 anti-tank missiles that can be used to take out tanks and other weapons. We also have a substantial number of artillery weapons that we can give. Failing to give the weapons to Ukraine to defend themselves is akin to me saying, "I'll hold your jacket," while you fight somebody with a gun. I know that many people in Ireland feel that we should not provide weapons. But asking you to defend yourself against a vicious attack, an unwarranted attack, and offering you nothing but money and our hands tied with respect to weapons, for me, is not good enough. I am military myself, and those of us in this House and in the lower house who come from a military background believe the only way to support military is with the weapons that they can use to fight off the enemy. So I am making a plea here and now amongst my colleagues. Real support comes with providing you with the tools to save your lives, to save the lives of your children, to maintain your cities, and to stop the Russians in their track. Now let's turn to the issue of food, and we spoke this morning about the grain and the grain stores. There are, I forget how many tons, I know Dimitri told me it was 700 million tons, is it? Or something like that? Okay, there's quite a substantial amount of grain in storage, and it cannot be gotten out of Ukraine to the rest of the world. So, as was rightly pointed out today, starvation, famine, is another tool that's been used by one of the belligerents in this war, and that is Russia. And by introducing famine into places like North Africa, you destabilise the entire geopolitical system. So, we are a member of the United Nations Security Council. I'm on record as having no faith in the United Nations Security Council and very little faith in the United Nations. But if we are truly there to protect the individuals of this world, to ensure that men and women and children have access to food, then we must put in place a peace enforcement unit in the Black Sea that will open the port of Odessa and allow food to be transferred out of Ukraine to the rest of the world. We cannot sit on our hands in the world and say, we'll give Ukraine everything they need to fight, but the one thing we won't do is we will not provide them with access to the world market and allow them to transfer food to those that need it in the world. There are grains sitting in your silos in Ukraine today that will rot if it is not gotten out of it. Worse still, this year's harvest will have nowhere to go if we don't empty those silos. The United Nations must prove itself to be an organisation that represents the downtrodden in this world and those who would be oppressed by tyrants, and provide the necessary tools and equipment to open the ports in Ukraine and allow the food and grain that is there to be transferred. After all, across Europe we have not closed the gas pipelines. We have not closed the oil pipelines. We have threatened to do it, and we will do it in time. We must open the ports in Ukraine. We must allow the Ukrainian people to transfer what they have, which is needed by the rest of the world. So my plea today is, when you speak to our government ministers, when your ministers speak to our government and other European governments, two things are needed. One, we need you to be armed in order that you can defend yourself. And secondly, we need your ports open. And if that takes a massive naval flotilla to go down and open the ports in Odessa, then that's what we must do. Talk is cheap. Let's see action from the United Nations, and let's see it now. Thank you.